Hello, I'm Zach Chahalis. This is a view of my presentation from Pubcon 2024, focused on SEO replatformings. I've titled this presentation, Don't Get Left Out in the Rain, and how to ensure that your next replatforming project is a success. So a little bit about myself. So I'm Zach Chahalis. I'm currently the Vice President of SEO for Apartments.com. I've been in the SEO space now for a little over about 14 years, and I feel like I'm qualified to talk about replatformings because I've done over 75 of them with a wide variety of major brands and different sites over the years. My career has been a balance of in-house and agency SEO, including time with iPull Rank, Search Discovery, and ResponseFind Interactive, as well as some prior in-house experience before my current role at Apartments.com. And feel free to like and follow me at Zach Chahalis on X or Twitter and Zachary Chahalis on LinkedIn. So this is also my dog Ruger. So my dog is a Golden Doodle. If anyone's familiar with a Golden Doodle, they're very expressive dogs overall. So with that said, you'll see a little bit more of him later as we kind of work through this presentation and conversation. So how do most SEOs look when they hear the word replatforming? Well, generally I see an expression that looks something like this, kind of a mixture of terror, maybe a little bit of excitement, but overall just you're a little bit concerned around what might happen. How I hope you'll look at replatformings after this conversation is a little bit more like this, where you're a little bit more happy, upbeat, and excited about what might come next. So jumping in, just a little bit of story time here. This is an example of what a replatforming looks like when not done properly. As you might guess, the overall launch of the website happened right around here. And then Google, Bing, everyone started to get their hands on the website, and things were not just, they weren't done properly. There was no redirect mapping done. There were a lot of changes. There were not considerations levied around organic search performance and what is cared about by the search engines. The concern here is that they really didn't begin to get concerned and talk to people about what happened until right around here, where they thought maybe we should get some help. Like, this is a good example of kind of what not to do in this space. And this is about how I looked when they came to me about a year after launch saying, hey, we don't know what happened and our traffic tanked. Help us figure it out. So, really, kind of SEO's more dream that a replatforming process will be this nice mountain drive and a sunny day. You have a beautiful view, but really it feels more like this. And you're kind of just hanging on for dear life. And you kind of want to understand, hey, how can you be the most effective here at doing this project? So with that said, I'm going to talk mainly about a specific project case example where, this is a site that I worked on many years ago, went live with a replatforming several years ago. But just to kind of give a little bit of context, so I worked for GameStop as an agency partner from 2014 through 2020. Their legacy website before the replatforming was about 10 years old. It had a lot of tech debt and was very difficult to update. For example, some various conversations around like implementing structured data. Feedback we would get from the team is it would take them about a year to figure out how to implement that properly. And it kind of forced the company to reevaluate more. Hey, we probably should look at a more modern platform. And they opted to replatform from legacy demandware to Salesforce Commerce Cloud in March of 2019. That process, replatforming, took about 18 months and quite honestly still launched about too quickly. In fact, they actually wanted to go live around Black Friday the year before, so opted not to do that, mainly to preserve the holiday season. But even then, there were still components that weren't even completed and ready to go by the time we actually did go live. Now, how did that project turn out? Well, that launched, like I said, around March 2019. And for the year after the replatforming launched, overall organic visibility actually climbed quite nicely. And we were able to take advantage of some overall organic growth and being able to address some of the tech debt and new opportunities that we want to implement on the site. This also led to about a 17% growth in year-over-year organic traffic to the site, as well as a 12% growth in organic e-commerce revenue. Now, you might be thinking GameStop, right? Like, there are a lot of things that happened in the last couple of years around GameStop. None of this accounts for the stock lift that took place around the whole meme stock era in the post COVID evaluation years. And in fact, it was kind of an uphill battle at that time. GameStop was very heavily rumored to be going out of business, and generally, folks thought that the company was more archaic in their practices at that point in time. With that said, GameStop is still alive today and performing quite well. But there were a lot of negative sentiments around GameStop overall at that time. And quite honestly, that was a little bit more around the brick and mortar based side of the business. The website was doing quite well, especially as we relaunched the site and made those improvements. So how do we do this? Our main focus is that we attack the project heads on. The biggest area of opportunity in replatforming is to be involved at the beginning, make sure that you're establishing everything, and that you're involved throughout the entire process from day one to go live date, if not well beyond the go live date. My team was there on day one for this project, and we were able to be very effective just off the bat, even being a part of kickoff calls and conversations and setting requirements. And this is where that requirement component really comes into play, right? We want to make sure that we're calling out all the key things that need to be done in a replatforming as early on as possible, so that way the website can be successful. The biggest challenge I always see in replatformings is that the SEO team or consultant or agency gets brought in really at the last minute, if not after go live. And by that point, trying to prioritize and implement any of the key SEO components that you want to do, then now you're fighting against the clock, or we have to push back a go live date. Where if we're able to get involved in the beginning, we can prioritize things accordingly within sprints, test along the way, and be more confident going live with the new site. The other thing too is we were able to be involved early on in the platform selection process, which is very valuable for an SEO in any replatforming situation. You need to understand that every platform has its pros and cons for SEO, and some things that might work great for the business purposes may require more out of the box thinking for SEO purposes. And that's where I lead into read the freaking manual. So understand what is built in to a platform for SEO purposes and other aspects as well, even outside of SEO, but also know what's not included in the box or those out of the box opportunities. So a couple examples in the course of my career is, Sitecore was a great platform to work with for a lot of different things, but it was always kind of a little bit behind in implementing certain components. Many years ago, when rel equals next and prev was more of a requirement, it didn't include that functionality out of the box for pagination. These days, Sitecore doesn't include any built-in out-of-the-box functionality around JSON LD structured data. So there are things that might need to be implemented along the way to do this. Salesforce Commerce Cloud, which was the platform that GameStop went with, has a track record and history of, let's say, technical content duplication, as well as some pages that follow different indexing rules out of the box and knowing which type of page template to use. So it's very important to use the right page template in that particular instance. So a couple other things to talk about from a replatforming is when you're kind of kicking it off, think about what can be done to help future-proof you as much as possible. A replatforming is a good time to take things to the edge, for example. So a couple of things here is look at edge SEO opportunities. Recommend looking at and checking out Nick Wilson's content for more. I've linked to a couple pieces within my deck. But also look at leveraging your CDN, Cloudflare, Akamai, et cetera, for redirect handling. That allows you to be a lot more optimized with handling those components. Some platforms allow you to do this inside them, but often have some type of limitation around like not being able to handle different legacy subdomains or things like that that were not built into the platform to begin with. So handling things at your CDN often is more optimized and allows for more flexibility than trying to do some things within the platform. And don't waste a replatforming opportunity. It is a valuable time to address tech debt or site structure, things like that. So in an ideal world, you would want to maintain your URL structures during replatforming, but if your site's not cleanly organized, this is a good time to handle doing it properly and just making sure you're doing all the domino effect activities that need to come into play there. And a big component I always see in SEO is soft skills are very undervalued for an SEO or an agency or an in-house team. You need to be able to work with the rest of the folks to have the project be done successfully. One, start with working with your designers and make sure they understand that search engines are based on mobile first. More than likely, your user base at this point is a mobile first based user base as well. But I still see many sites starting with a desktop site, even when mobile is the preferred platform in that case. So start with mobile, work your way of scaling up to different viewports and scale up to desktop. Don't ignore any particular viewport, but this is a good opportunity to make sure that you're starting off where you need to be from an organic standpoint. And also make sure you're working with your developers and speak their language. So if you're in an agile system, for example, knowing how your sprints work, knowing when your requirements are to get things either UAT'd or prepped for an upcoming sprint, developing stories and understanding how to write stories for your team. Craft those requirements that we were talking about before as a developer-focused story so that your team understands what they need to do and what not to do in those particular instances. Really, what this comes down to is throw your other teams a bone and be willing to compromise and work with other people in that sense. So, like I mentioned before, ideally you want to preserve your URL structure unless you're trying to clean up your site architecture. But this is really make or break to how successful your replatforming is going to be. When you're changing those URL structures, and in instances, you might not be able to control this. It might be a required thing that you might need to do for a particular platform. The key thing here are redirects. So making sure that you're implementing your 301 redirects effectively from your old URL to your new, limiting your redirect chains. So the analogy I look for here is every redirect chain or hop that it goes through in that redirect chain is almost like you moving in real life and you're changing your address with the postal service, but you're still trying to send mail to your old address, even maybe your first address, and you're praying it shows up at the new one. And more than likely, what's going to happen is not all the mail is going to make it. Things get lost along the way. It kind of works the same thing with redirects and passing along authority. Even though in the past, search engines have said, hey, we don't lose authority going through redirects, there have been multiple tested and case studies throughout the years that have proven there is a little bit of a loss in authority here. So you want to limit those chains as much as you can. Um, in this case, you want to avoid 302 redirects unless truly, truly temporary. And what I mean by that is like at most 6 months, ideally less than that. But keep in mind, a 302 redirect does not pass along authority and does not encourage the search engines to remove the old URL from the index. So there's some value in that. And let's say a certain section of the site has not been completed for go live. But if you use a 302 in an instance where you mean to be permanent, it's not going to be as effective and it's going to take a lot longer time for your URLs to pass along that authority and to get flushed from the index, if at all. And lastly, make sure that you verify your implementation. So make sure that you're evaluating those redirect rules and that they're working effectively. With that said, make sure that you preserve your redirects in perpetuity. So this is about how I'm going to look if I hear from a couple years from now, hey, we thought we didn't need to maintain those redirects anymore. It's been a couple years. We don't need them. Let's get rid of them. I've seen instances in the past where I've worked with sites that 5 years after replatforming, they chose to get rid of the legacy redirects and their performance tanked as a result of it. Those legacy redirects still retain a ton of authority, and search engines will always go back and check URLs that used to exist just to see if anything has changed over time. So you want to make sure that you preserve them in perpetuity until they go away. But at the same time, you also want to be efficient with your redirects, right? Like now we're talking about preserving things for a long time. That starts to add up. You have a lot of redirects there. The more redirects that you can consolidate into single rules, the better off you're going to perform. There's a great case study here from Matthew Edgar, and this is his data on the side here, but kind of showing that the more redirects you have, there is going to be an impact to site load time performance as a result of it. So you want to be as optimized as you can to ensure that you're not slowing down your site with a large number of redirects. This is where wildcard rules are going to be your savior. And that's something where you can leverage AI effectively to kind of say, hey, here's my old URL string, here's my new URL string. Can you help me develop a redirect rule that will align with this? And this is if you're not comfortable doing something like regex or understanding how you want to implement rules on your particular website. ChatGPT and AI bots can help you here. So this is definitely a big area of opportunity here. And this is an example that I put together just within ChatGPT myself. So there's also a good case study here around how to do redirect mapping through AI from Cal Eggleston. So feel free to check that out. I've linked that within my slide deck as well. I've also designed a couple tools to try and hopefully make your life easier during the replatforming. The first is called Hop Scout. This is essentially a dynamic Google sheet that's built to monitor and check redirect statuses and chains and tell you if there are multiple hops or if there's opportunities or if a redirect went away. So I highly recommend checking that out. Similarly, I've also built a redirect map template and Screaming Frog checker that will allow you to build out what your redirect mapping should be and then effectively check that against Screaming Frog based on you pulling in your redirect chains report and help understand, hey, are the redirects actually doing what I want them to do? So hopefully trying to make your QA process here more optimized. And don't forget your legacy redirects. Like I said in that instances, you don't want to leave your legacy authority behind to rot. By cleaning up those redirect chains and hops, this allows you to get the most amount of authority out of all those legacy redirects. So a quick example here is I used to work with a retailer back in the day. And over about a 7-year span, they redesigned their store page URLs and content about 5 times. rather than updating all those legacy redirects, what they would do is just chain them all together. So in theory, the first one's now hopping 4 or 5 times to get to its new home. And you've lost so much authority kind of going through that. But also, search engines are not going to follow very long redirect chains. Some of the other search engines, Google's a little bit better at this, but some of the other search engines will give up after a certain number of hops. And this is just really a detriment to you at that point. You're not passing on any authority, and search engines may not even see your new URLs at that point. The other big call out here is make sure that you're handling errors correctly. Understand where to use a 404 and when to use a 410 gone. A good example for a 410 gone is like if you have um, junk code or spam or a URL resulted in some type of a search result. Hey, I can make 50 million URLs here type of thing. A 410 gone is great in that type of instance, but a 404 should be served when a page doesn't exist. And it's okay that a website has 404s. You just want to avoid linking to them and serving them to search engines. But in theory, not every URL is going to exist. So 404s are okay. And I think that gets maybe over-indexed in the other sense, like 404s are bad. They can be bad. It's just how you handle them. And if you clean up the redirects, in links, everything kind of going into them, it can be a healthy part of a website. With that said, you do want to avoid server errors. That can tell Google, Bing, and all the other search engines that website might not be stable and may have particular problems. And you especially want to avoid serving a 500 error on your robots.txt file. But at the same time, if your site's going to be down for a period, including maybe when your site's actually launching from a replatforming, serve a 503. That tells search engines, hey, we're down temporarily, but we'll come back soon. Like don't reevaluate us as a result of that. This is also a good point of making sure that you're watching your canonicals throughout this website process. So this is a good case I mentioned where Salesforce Commerce Cloud can create technical content duplication. So this is an example I worked with where it dynamically injected a query string called PD show equals true into every single internal link in the nav. This basically just pointed to a bunch of non-canonical URLs and then forced Google to reevaluate which one was the main one or not. This particular website also, when I looked at them, they included their canonical tag in the body rather than the head. So in this case, Google started to prefer the PD show equals true URLs because in theory, they weren't actually seeing a functional canonical tag on the page. So make sure that your canonical tags are properly implemented and that you're preferring the URL that you want the search engines to focus on. Alternates are also a key area of opportunity with a replatforming, as well as a key area to cause problems, right? Especially if you're an hreflang alternate language, alternate country-based website, you need to make sure that you're using alternate tags appropriately to help Google understand which of your pages are complementary versus which of your pages are duplicative. The last thing you want is that you're having a Spanish language site and an English language site, and for some reason, Google considers your Spanish language to be a duplicate. This is where canonicals and alternates can work together to make sure that things are seen as a complement. It's also still used in instances where your site might be an M dot. So if you're still using M dot or a separate subdomain for a mobile site, making sure that you're handling M dot alternate tags appropriately. Also make sure that your robots.txt file and page level no index rules are properly optimized. In the case of GameStop here, so we built out the robots.txt file to block parameters within Salesforce Commerce Cloud that we didn't want search engines to understand or see. Now, with these being new URLs, the robots.txt file was a bit more effective at trying to get search engines to not even look at these pages to begin with. But a search engine may not respect your robots.txt file strictly, right? So they may ignore the rules that you have in here, or if URLs are already in Google's index, the robots.txt file is not going to be very effective at getting them out of them. This is where your page level no index rules will come into play more, as well as potentially no following internal links that go to pages that you don't want Google to go to. And also make sure that you build and validate your XML sitemaps. So when you're looking at your sitemap, make sure it includes only URLs that work, that are 200 OK, canonical URLs that you want search engines to pay attention to. Think of your XML sitemap as your roadmap for search engines to your website. The last thing you want to do is give incorrect directions in that roadmap so that search engines, hey, they get confused or they think that your site has errors or problems. It's almost kind of like saying, hey, oh, how do I get to this point in time? And you're not giving them the correct directions or you're sending them some backwater way. In this sense, you want to make sure that you're also prioritizing things like your last mod and that's accurate to the last time the page truly changed versus I see a lot of CMS platforms where the last mod is just a function of when the sitemap last generated. Search engines rely on this field more than a lot of folks think that they do. And this allows them to understand when to set things like call frequency. Now, with that said, change frequency and priority, as kind of shown here in this particular example, these aren't necessary fields. And in fact, Google's own documentation now says we ignore change frequency and priority. So I typically more often than not recommend not including them. This was just valuable back in the day when this was originally done. The other thing too is consider a dirty XML sitemap here. So a dirty XML sitemap is basically curating all of your old URLs if you change URL structures and putting them into an XML sitemap and submitting that to search engines. The benefit here is you leave this in for a couple of weeks, and if pages aren't crawled as frequently, it kind of encourages search engines to go back and view those old pages quicker than if left to their own devices. So I've seen this be a lot more effective at helping search engines understand a dramatic site change, like a re-architecture of URL structures. And it kind of forces things to move over a little bit quickly to the new home. The other thing too is make sure that you're leveraging Google's indexing API as well as index now with relation to Bing and pushing your content and key changes to search engines so that they understand it more effectively. A point here is also if your website happened to change domains as a part of your replatforming project, this is a good time to make sure you also do something like a change of address within the particular Search Console Bing Webmaster Tools API or UIs. So that way the search engines understand, hey, this site used to be here, it now actually lives here instead. And the biggest call out takeaway to me, I'll touch on takeaways more in a second as well, is URL consistency is key. If you're not consistent in these fields, for example, Google, Bing, search engines as a whole may get confused and may not understand what you want. For example, canonical URL being different from an internal link being different from a sitemap. Now you're telling Google, Bing, like potentially 2 or 3 different ways of serving a URL or serving particular content. They may not choose the one that you want. So these should all be consistent and pointing to the same places. And don't forget to set and watch your benchmarks. So understand the KPIs that are important to your business. Understand the measurement of those things. Make sure your analytics is accounted for as a part of this entire project as well. But understand where you should be and watch out for those benchmarks and kind of know, hey, we're kind of pacing along here. What's deemed a success or a disaster, or do we need to look at something further? And what timelines to look at those particular instances. So my top takeaways here is 1, like I said, be consistent. Make sure you're not sending mixed signals to search engines. 2, have those benchmarks and know what you're comparing success against. 3, if you are changing your URL structures, redirects will be your biggest point of opportunity and failure during this process. So make sure that you spend and give that the amount of attention that it truly deserves. Work with your developers and be open to compromise and leverage your soft skills. The other thing I'll say here is things will have to give and take during the replatforming process. Even in a case where this project took 18 months, there was a good amount of give and take to understand what needed to be done for go live to meet the deadline timeline that we wanted to go with. So some things didn't make the initial launch, and you have to be open to understand what is make or break and what are some things that you can be a little bit more flexible on to kind of work with your other teams more effectively. Make sure that you understand your platform and be prepared to address what is not out of the box and know when to raise an alarm and what can be post-launch or what can be addressed at a later time. So with that, thank you for your time here. You're welcome to grab a copy of the slides at the link up here. I've also included some links to the replatforming tools I mentioned for HotScout and the redirect template. And be sure to like and follow me if you're interested in learning more on replatformings or SEO as a whole. I'm big into technical SEO and always willing to help talk about this with other folks. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and I am happy to discuss. Thank you so much.